I'm Jack Lacey, and this is the G.O.A.T podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the G.O.A.T podcast. We're into episode 3 of our Everton mini-series, and we're joined by, I think, one of our favourite guests from last season. He's one of our best mates outside of the podcast as well. So it's a real pleasure. Not from the Athletes Village this time. He's going to have to introduce where he is this time. He came up with a very interesting suggestion actually before of what we could call where he's currently dwelling for this podcast. But we're joined, aren't we, Jack, by none other than Dan Haygarth for the third instalment of the mini-series.
And we should add as well, Dan is a huge Everton fan, in case no one failed to pick up on that in the first series. But yeah, welcome, Dan. Thanks for joining us, mate.
No, thank you very much for inviting me back, gents. Always a pleasure doing the podcast. Enjoy it very much. And as you've alluded to, Tom, I'm no longer in the Athletes Village in East Manchester. I am currently back at, moved back home, as the pandemic has done to many of us, and I'm broadcasting from the Spare Room Media Centre at the minute. But yeah, it's nice.
Fabulously named.
It's glamorous surroundings, I have to say.
Glamorous indeed. I can see the wardrobe behind him and I think the bed frame as well.
Yeah,
so, glamorous setting.
Can I just before we kick off as well, Jeds, can you remember how many times you won last season, Dan? Or do I need to dig up the official GOAT stats book?
I think it was only once. And I think it was World Cup 2018 I won for.
That was it. Yeah. The Great World Cups, yeah.
One of our best episodes, I think. I really enjoyed that one. I enjoyed the Euros one as well. I think it was on for Dan. Yeah. That was a classic. And the tennis one as well. So anyone listening, if you want to go back through the archives and have a listen to them, by the way. So we're plugging that now, but yeah, they were 3 really good episodes for us as well.
That was really us talking about elite international sport. And today we're gonna be moving on to Everton, but I still think there's a bit of you'll agree, Dan. There've been some golden years, which probably as well. I don't know, we're gonna come on to your selections in a minute, but we should probably talk as well about what your thoughts are on Carlo and how things are going for the Blues so far this season as well.
Yeah, that's it's an interesting one really, because we started the season in a manner I don't think anyone in their wildest dreams saw coming. Because we finished last season after Project Restart so terribly, looked so bereft of ideas that even the great Carlo Ancelotti couldn't elevate us. And then he spent the summer with some pretty wise buys, and we just came out the blocks absolutely firing and blew everyone away. And then an international break, I think, came at a terrible time for us. And after we came back and we drew that controversial Merseyside derby, and for a month after that we looked terrible. And could barely score a goal, couldn't win a game, and then it picked up again. So it's been a season of sort of 3 periods already, where we had one where we were truly brilliant, one where we looked as bad as we were last season, and another one that's had some big wins, beating Leicester, Arsenal, and Chelsea, but have been sort of far more pragmatic than we were at the start of the season. So it's been a very interesting season, but I'm very happy. Watching James Rodriguez on a weekly basis is a privilege I never thought I would ever see at Everton Football Club. The signings have been on the whole great. Ben Godfrey has been a real star. Seeing the amount of goals Dominic Calvert-Lewin is scoring is wonderful, and I feel really vindicated because not wanting to blow my own trumpet, but I did always back him. I maybe never thought he was going to get 15 goals by January, but I always thought he had it in him to be a goal scorer. So it's an exciting time to be an Evertonian, because I think, at the minute, at time of recording, we've got a real chance to break into the top 4 in the next few weeks.
Definitely.
We've got, and that's just amazing at this stage of the season, really. And I think the nature of this weird season means it's up for grabs, and you see traditionally big 6 teams like Arsenal and Chelsea floundering below us. We have to take advantage of that and break into the top 6 at last, I think.
Is this the most exciting time, would you say, within your lifetime that you've had as an Everton fan? Has been seasons 04-05 was great in the league. There was FA Cup runs under David Moyes. There was the Martinez year as well, I think 13-14. Is this probably a period now where you feel you're kind of more versed for a more sustained period of success with the infrastructure at the club, with the new stadium and the new manager?
Probably. I'd probably have to say so. Like, I'm an eternal pessimist apart from when it comes to Everton, and I somehow fall into the trap of optimism constantly. So I got myself excited 2 years ago when Marco Silva signed Moise Kean. I thought that was the missing piece to get us into the top six, and it didn't happen. Marco was sacked halfway through the season, but so I don't know. There have been. I was lucky in that when I started watching Everton, it was sort of when Rooney was breaking through, and watching him was so exciting. And then we sold him, and I was about 7 years old, and it just broke my heart. But the season after, we finished fourth, and that's the first season I can almost really remember most games from. And we weren't brilliant because Everton teams weren't brilliant under David Moyes, but him getting that team to fourth was remarkable. And suddenly you dream of playing Barcelona and AC Milan and Inter Milan, and you dream of European nights, and we end up getting knocked out in the qualifiers by Villarreal. Which was a hard draw anyway because they ended up being semi-finalists. But that time, because I was 7, and I just thought, oh, we got fourth this season, we could win the league next year. You do just fall into that it's not childlike, it is childish excitement. The Martinez year is the best football I've seen us play. That first season, 13-14, we were absolutely brilliant.
It was a very good Everton side, wasn't it? There's no doubt.
Lukaku's scoring goals with a brilliant Kevin Morales on one wing, Gerard Deulofeu on the other. Gareth Barry in the centre of the park, who I adored. Ross Barkley,
one of your favourites,
yeah. Ross Barkley was his first season.
Breaking
he was
through,
great. Yeah. So that was a great team. But then, as we know, the Martinez era petered out. So this probably is the. I mean, Carlo Ancelotti's won 3 European Cups. I mean, you constantly have to remind yourself of that. Even when we look like we're struggling to hold on to a point or whatever, you just think, Carlo's got this. We were 1-0 up. We were 1-0 up against Chelsea very early, and he played it in a very Italian style and just saw the game out. And there's a feeling of calm and game management and confidence around Everton Football Club that I just don't recognise, because I was brought up on tales of the 80s of Everton being a great side, winning 2 league titles in that decade, winning a European trophy, having great players like Peter Reid, Graham Sharp, Trevor Steven, Kevin Sheedy, Big Nev Salford. And then you get to following Everton, as I did in the 2000s. It's a really weird experience because there are plenty of football clubs who have to deal with disappointment, but not many football clubs that have to deal with the level of disappointment that Everton do have the glorious past that Everton do. And I think that's what gives you the hope, is you think, well, my uncle and my mum and my dad have all told me about title-winning Everton teams, and I'm watching us finish 8th, 9th, hoping to finish 7th. And people around, I had times at university when people were telling me Southampton were a bigger club than Everton because they'd finished 7th more recently. And you think, hold on here, Everton have 9 league titles. Southampton don't have a single one. Everton have 9 league titles, 5 FA Cup titles, and a European trophy. There's not many more successful English clubs. But you would forgive people who've only watched football in the 2000s for thinking Everton are a run-of-the-mill, solid, dependable Premiership club. And now, almost the arrival of Carlo Ancelotti was the reminder you needed of, no, actually, we're massive. We are a massive football club. And
this is what it can be like.
Yeah, it was a statement of intent that just hadn't happened in my life, because we'd gone from taking promising young managers from Preston North End, Wigan Athletic, Southampton, Hull City, I think Silva came from, to hiring one of the best coaches in history. And you just think, there's part of you that thinks, I don't recognise this. How the hell have Everton hired Carlo Ancelotti? And there's another part that I know Dave Prentice said in your first episode, that he'd always been an advocate of going for your Benitez Mourinho style manager. There is that fan who's older than me who saw the 80s, maybe even saw the 60s, and thinks, no, Everton and Carlo Ancelotti are a perfect match. So it's marrying those two ideas really that make Everton such a unique club. So while I think I've rambled far off from your original question, I think it all plays into that, because there is at the back of your mind when you think, actually, the times under Moyes where the squad we had, you probably had to tell yourself, look, finishing 8th this season's a good result. But then hold on. Teams that have won 9 English League titles don't settle for finishing 8th. And I think for all that's gone wrong in the Mashiri era with bad recruitment and whatever, he is someone in charge of the club now who says, no, finishing 8th isn't good enough. And that's why we've hired Carlo Ancelotti.
Yeah. He's a world-class manager, and like you say, 3 European Cups, and it does feel like a markedly different Everton than the one we witnessed in the 2000s already. And I think you're making such strides now in the league, and I think, like you say, it is up for grabs, really. I think anything could happen this year. I think realistically there's 6 or 7 teams in the hunt now for top 4 and then the championship itself, so it's going to be really interesting, I think, in the next couple of years, I think, with Everton, to see how that's going to pan out. And I think with a manager that good, you can imagine that this is your best chance really of making the most of the investment from Mashiri as well, like you say. So I think we've got you on quite an interesting time in Everton's history, really, and I'm glad you've got sort of a younger fan to give that perspective as well, Lacey, who can sort of rely on what the 2000s were like and sort of give us an impression of what that was like for an Everton fan, but this new era as well, that seems like a clean break really from that as well, Lacey.
Yeah, I think, and I will. It's interesting because you wonder, an Everton fan, say, who was born in the late 80s or like during the most successful period, but then was only able to remember football from like the early 90s. Do you know what I mean? Which obviously a more lean decade for Everton.
Oh, the Everton fans who remember the 90s have had it far worse than me.
Yeah,
because you look at how we were in the 90s and we were bloody awful. We were terrible. Yeah.
So it's like, you're right, mate. It's that interesting balance between, I don't know, it's always interesting, fans who've grown up in successful eras, what they expect. And I mean, to be fair, Dan, you've grown up in difficult era in terms of trophies compared to the 80s, but in terms of like average league finishing position, which I know sounds really boring, but you've probably got, you've seen some good seasons, like you say. So it's interesting to have that distinction, and I'm looking forward to hearing what your selections are for this episode.
Indeed. No, so I think without further ado, Dan, it's time for us to delve into who you think the greatest ever Everton footballer is.
I'd love to give you some preamble here and say there's any sort of discussion up for who was Everton's greatest ever player, because you could argue, if you really wanted to be contrary, that because he's won the most trophies at the club, Neville Southall's the club's greatest ever player. Yeah. You could say that Alan Ball's one of the most naturally gifted midfielders this country has ever produced. You could, like Harry Catterick said, say that Colin Harvey was even better and was the most naturally gifted English midfielder of his era. But then you realise Everton had the original number 9 in English football, a man who scored 349 league goals in 399 appearances, including 60 in one season. And then you realise, actually, there's not even anything approaching an argument here, because Dixie Dean is probably, I don't know, it feels like a bold claim because he's never, ever included in arguments such as this, probably because he had his best years in the 1920s. He's probably the finest footballer of all eras this country has ever produced. Because I genuinely think that's an argument. And
it's got to be close, hasn't it? There's no doubt about it. You look at the
and
records.
Obviously the game was different. Obviously the game was different 100 years ago, 90 years ago. Hugely different, almost unrecognisable. But it was still football. You have loads of people sort of. I think it's an often used thing to mock Everton with, is their best player last played 90 years ago. What a sort of joke this is. But you can only play in the era you were in, and he happened to be the best player in the era he was in, and he happened to score. The 60 goals he scored in the 1927-28 season it's beyond. That's 60 league goals. I think he ended up with something like 67 in all competitions.
It's never getting beat, that is it? It's never
60 league goals. I don't think Messi and Ronaldo have done those numbers. No. And
I was looking this up actually. I think there was only one. I think Messi had that season, didn't he? It was 63. 63, God, really? But that was all competition. So even Dixie Dean beat him on that count as well.
Mate, and this is the thing. People can dismiss Dixie Dean and say it happened 90 years ago, but 90 years in the future, all of Messi's goals are 90 years old. So what, do they suddenly stop counting?
Exactly.
It's such a ridiculous argument. This man who, obviously, I haven't seen him play. Dave Prentice hasn't seen him play. No living Evertonian has seen Dixie Dean play. But the history and the iconography around Dixie Dean, the statue at Goodison's Park End, he is Everton. And Everton has a great heritage of number 9s and centre forwards. And that is started really by Dixie Dean. And I was, when I first got into football, my dad really, really encouraged learning the club's history. It's a bit of a cliche with Everton, if you know your history and all this. But I was bought book after book. I mean, my dad half wanted me to make sure I was going to go do an English degree, but he also half wanted to make sure I understood Everton's heritage. So it was two birds, one stone. So to get me into reading, he just bought me book after book about Everton's history. I had this book I've read 5 or 6 times. I was trying to find it today, and I just cannot find it here. It's called Dixie Uncut: The Lost Interview. It's this. I think it might have been Echo or Daily Post did an interview with Dixie Dean just after he retired, and I just read it almost in awe. Just thinking, because while it's 90 years ago, it's still your club. So for a 9-year-old boy reading about someone like Dixie Dean, it's almost comic book stuff, because it's like this man wore that royal blue shirt and scored 60 goals in it, and you just think this is the most incredible thing ever. So growing up as an Evertonian, you just revere that history. And he also got 18 goals in his 16 England caps, which is another pretty good record as well. But
that's got to be the best goals to game record. I know people have said about Peter Crouch in this era, but I think surely to God Dixie Dean there for his England record. That's got to be the best
you'd
goal
pick
average.
Dean over Crouch, I think, if you needed a goal off the bench.
Be some partnership.
But yeah, he's just. I've seen photos. There might be the old sort of grainy, cinematic, sort of footage that people get of him. This towering, big, strong, almost the model of what we see as an English centre forward could be based on Dixie Dean. The powerful, broad-shouldered, brilliant in the air, great header of the ball, and just a brilliant goal scorer. Also, vaguely a local, brought up in Birkenhead. We got him from Tranmere Rovers, but also, the fact, it's a completely different area. I think he ran a pub in Ireland after he retired. Played for Sligo, and almost there is the fact that he died at Goodison Park. I think 1st of March 1980 at a Merseyside derby. Really poetic end to almost finish at the place that you are the absolute hero at. He is so much better than anyone else who's ever played for Everton. It's almost difficult to put into words because, I remember when I think Frank Lampard overtook Chelsea's scoring record, or club scoring record, and you think nobody ever is going to score more than 395 goals for Everton Football Club. Anyone could try. Dominic Calvert-Lewin could be 57 and he still wouldn't be close to 395 goals for Everton Football Club. And it's staggering. It is just, and yes, all you really have is statistics to look at, but I'm not sure there's a better statistic than 60 goals in a league title winning season. And also,
the fact he won the title as well, like the fact it was a title winning team shows that,
I think he scored a hat-trick to take him to 60 on the final day of the season against Arsenal. Or he certainly scored 3 against Arsenal to take him to 60, which is such a great way to do it as well. And there's there's great anecdotes that whenever he scored at Anfield, he'd bow at the cop because it would wind them up, and you just think that's sort of that's great sort of just showmanship, really. The man is almost Everton glory personified, really, and it's almost the fact that it's so long ago and it's almost intangible now. Just almost makes it even better because it's of sort of law. It's Everton law now. Really,
exactly.
Dixie Dean's career, and and I love the fact. As far as I understand, the 1933 FA Cup final that Everton beat Manchester City in was the first game in English football to wear shirt numbers, and Everton wore 1 to 11, and City wore 12 to 23. So I think Dixie Dean was the first number 9 in English football.
Oh, I love that. That's fantastic. Yeah.
I think that's just perfect, really.
So you speak about sort of the, defining the number 9, and you say that little fact there as well. But you look at that lineage in Everton's history, and it's almost as though this, obviously not a carbon copy of Dixie Dean, that'd be, impossible to recreate what he was able to do. But this real culture at the club, I think that definitely still exists now. You look at Dominic Calvert-Lewin, for example, of these great forwards who there's a long list of them as well, isn't there? As you know, who sort of they define that era for that club. Every single era that you look at, And Dixie's probably the best ever example of that. He defines the club as well.
Yeah,
But I think that's the whole thing, isn't it, with Everton as well?
It's something we definitely share with Newcastle, I was going to say, Jack, because obviously the number 9 is so big at Newcastle. And it almost, so much so that it becomes a burden for current players. You know, I remember when, as you mentioned, DCL took the number 9 shirt, I think it was at the start of last season, and just no one felt he was ready. Because it means, it feels so stupid, but it means so much. There's a great documentary about Everton actually called Howard's Way, about the 80s team, where Andy Gray speaks about, he was going through a goal drought, and obviously that was before a period of assigned squad numbers. So either him or Graham Sharp would wear 9 or 10. And Andy Gray just couldn't score. I think he was completely out of touch and hadn't scored for ages. And he asks Sharp, can I wear number 9 next game? And he scores in the next game. And so Everton, it feels so important because, and it's funny, it was something for me to deal with growing up, because obviously we had Wayne Rooney, most talented English player of his generation, come through. After that, we were treated to unparalleled levels of crap centre forwards who just were brought in and couldn't do it. And, you know, I loved James Beattie because he scored so many at Southampton, so he thought he was going to come in and he was going to be a real instant great Everton number 9, apparently. Had one good season, then couldn't do it. And a good season for James Beattie was scoring 12. So you know, it's not even you know, it's not even Bob Latchford levels of, you know, Bob Latchford scored 30 goals, I think, in the 1978 season. Dixie Dean presented him with an award and said, "Oh, well done on 30, lad, but it's still only half as good as I got." and there is almost that, once a club has had a centre forward and a wearer of the number 9 who scored 60 league goals in a season, where else do you go? How else? What else can a striker do? Duncan Ferguson, a great modern Everton centre forward, quite a lean goal scoring record, but that shirt just means so much to the football club.
Do you think? I'm not concerned, lads, but I'm starting to think that we might have selected for our first club the club where this is just a complete. It's the argument's almost. It's not. Yeah, it's straightforward almost, but like. I don't know. I suppose Haygarth talked as well about the Neville Southall potentially as being a great. I think goalkeepers are often overlooked in this debate, as I've said on other episodes before. Like, I'm always banging the drum for goalkeepers and defenders to get as much recognition as the goal scorers in these debates. But yeah, I mean, I know we've got to do it. We've got to cover your cult hero and your greatest team as well, Dan. But is there, if you take Dixie Dean aside, is there anyone clear as like a runner-up, a worthy runner-up?
Well, if the runner-up probably has to be Neville Southall, because you watch some of those clips and it's fortunate that a lot of that, well, not a lot, but enough of that 80s Everton side is captured on film. But captured in video. That you see Neville Southall, who became a big man towards the end of his career, but one of the most agile, brilliant goalkeepers in the 80s you'll ever wish. Just astonishingly good. And we're not treated to a great number 1 at Everton at the minute. So watching Neville is great. If I had to go differently and pick a best Everton player I've ever seen, it would probably be, funny enough, it would probably be a centre forward, but not aware of the number 9, because it would probably be Romelu Lukaku. I think wore 17 and then 10. So Aruna Kone was the number 9.
But he was a number 9, like the way he played, wasn't he? Like he couldn't be more number 9, really.
But it would be Romelu.
I couldn't imagine Lukaku in the number 10 role, to be honest. It's not really his role.
First touch isn't up to it, really. But it would be Romelu or Leighton Baines, who just defines modern Everton to me. But in terms of all time, it's the top 3 are probably the same as Dave Prentice, Dixie Dean. I'd put Neville Southall second above Alan Ball, probably just for the sheer amount he won at Everton. Probably a combination of your runner-up could be all sorts of honourable mentions, from Alan Ball to Howard Kendall to Colin Harvey to Kevin Sheedy to Bob Latchford to Graham Sharp. If you wanted to go more modern, in terms of pure skill, you should do much better than Mikel Arteta, really. It's a club that even in every era is just blessed with great footballers.
Well, I think that's pretty much rounded up the suggestions from the previous episodes, hasn't it, as well, Lacey? And I think, it's possibly you're right that we've picked the one club, really, where there's not as much debate in a way about who the most iconic player is for Everton. And I think, in a way, you look at those pictures at Goodison Park, and obviously they'll be leaving Goodison in the next 5 years, but he is synonymous with the club, and I think that there's certainly no other choice I think that we could ever argue, really, is there?
No, I mean, but I am pleased that each of the three guests we've had on so far haven't. I think it's good that they've not defined it just to their era or just players they've seen. And I know we allow our guests are welcome to do that if they want to, but I think everyone's gone for a historical overview of the entire history of the club, and it's interesting that it's a completely unanimous winner of Dixie Dean. But let's perhaps a more interesting question in terms of debate. Anyway, I'm looking forward to see who Dan's gone for his cult hero.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, this is a tough one because I know your previous guests have almost debated what it means to be a cult hero, and there's an obvious choice with Everton, certainly for an Evertonian of my age, for a cult hero, because while I think you could argue that the tag of cult hero almost degrades someone, it might imply that someone might not be the most talented, but. Duncan Ferguson is as cult hero as a football club is ever going to have, because yes, in the 90s he was a great player, a brilliant striker who, hell of a left foot, brilliant on the edge of the box, actually very good close control and imperious in the air. But that for me is captured in videos, and the reason why Duncan Ferguson would be my cult hero, and I do have a few relatively interesting honourable mentions that I'll mention after this, is encapsulated in two events in his Everton career, both of which I remember, because I think cult hero, for someone to mean something to you as a cult hero, you almost have to remember what they did to earn that cult hero status and to have seen it happen. And we were playing Manchester United in the 2004-05 season, Tom, which, as you mentioned, was the one we finished fourth. And we were really pushing for fourth. And obviously, United, not particularly brilliant at that time. I think that was in their league. They hadn't won a title for a while, I think. They are rivals for the top four. And we're playing at Goodison under the lights. And it's actually one of the few times in his life, I hate to be rude to a fellow member of the press, but it's one of the few times in life that I think Martin Tyler has really captured a moment with a line of commentary. Where under the lights, I think second half, Everton have a free kick, left touch line, perfect to be swung into the box, and Mikel Arteta puts a beautiful ball in. And there, charging in front of his man, it's Duncan Ferguson who gets the most perfect header on it, plants it in the corner. Tyler's commentary's great. It's worth looking on YouTube. And Goodison erupts like you have never heard a football ground erupt. And yes, it's a goal against Manchester United in the season where you're hoping for Europe. So any goal is going to send the ground crazy. But with Dunk, you got that extra 25% or something where it just the roof comes off. And we saw that again 15 years later when Marco Silva's been sacked. Everton are looking, not for the first time in my lifetime, identityless. We're genuinely falling towards the relegation area after spending millions, hundreds of millions of pounds on substandard players, and you just think this is the culmination of a failed experiment. Someone needs to put Everton back on track, and we play Chelsea in a really difficult game at home. And Duncan Ferguson has taken over as caretaker manager, and people would be forgiven for thinking, even though he'd become a very good forward coach, that Duncan may not have strike you as a tactical genius, of someone to get something perfectly right. But he went back to basics. He put Everton in a 4-4-2. He had Calvert-Lewin and Richarlison playing as traditional centre forwards. And Everton win that game 3-1. But they don't just win that game 3-1. They play in the most battlingly brilliant manner
to watch,
where Goodison came alive like it did against Manchester United 15 years prior. And I think twice Duncan just can't control himself as Goodison has erupted and we've just scored, and he tears down the touchline, and he doesn't do it coolly like
picks
Jose
up the ball
did.
by a thing.
No, exactly. Whereas Jose, when he was at Porto, just runs in his perfect shithouse way. Duncan can't control himself and just runs, and all of Goodison wanted to embrace Duncan Ferguson that night. So a
Yeah.
ball boy that day come tearing towards him, and Duncan picks him up and lifts him above his head. And the place is just on another level. And
Yeah.
you can argue for as long as you want that the tag of cult hero might demean Duncan Ferguson's ability as a striker. And let's be honest, for a man who is so revered as an Everton player, to have, I think, a goal record of 73 goals in 272 games, that's not a legend in terms of footballing ability by any means. And he was hurt by injury. He had some very lean seasons towards the end of his career. But if those two events encapsulate what it is to be a cult hero, which is, and I think for Everton, certainly Everton in Duncan Ferguson's lifetime, where you have that, it was the Joe Royals team that Ferguson was part of, known as the Dogs of War. Duncan encapsulates that, of making the most of limited options, maybe. I mean, that in a phrase doesn't quite capture it. But that Chelsea game, we were in a bad way and we're playing a team better than us.
Yeah.
And he got a true number 9 performance out of Calvert-Lewin. He scored twice. And the first time Calvert-Lewin looked like becoming a serious striker. But more importantly, he got Goodison absolutely bouncing. More fired up for a game that had been in years when it mattered. And yeah, that to me is a cult hero. He is maybe an obvious choice, but when you don't have a perfect goal record, but you are so revered by a fan base, to me you're a cult hero. He might go on and manage Everton one day. I don't think he should. Well, maybe he'll prove himself, but I can't quite imagine following the tactical genius of Carlo Ancelotti with Duncan Ferguson. Maybe he'll go to the SPL and prove himself. I don't know, but
I must say though, Dan, he got his tactics spot on for that Chelsea game. I know it's easy to say now that they won, but I remember that he narrowed the pitch. He played very direct, but like aggressive, high press again, and it was good to watch. I remember just. Obviously, I was neutral for that game, but I remember just really enjoying watching.
You are right. I mean, and there were 3 games he played against. I think Chelsea, Man United, and Arsenal, and each game he made it horrible for the opposition, who were better teams than us. So maybe I'm doing him a disservice tactically, but almost he's never going to be a progressive manager. And if Duncan Ferguson never gets the chance to manage Everton again, he will always have that. I think it was a January lunchtime that we beat Chelsea and moved away from the relegation area. And Goodison loved him almost more than they even did as a player. And it was just perfect. It was just perfect.
I think it's something I recognise for Everton as well. As someone who grew up in Liverpool, so I do understand sort of the identity of the club quite well, I'd say. And it is a club of identity. There's a lot of clubs that you struggle to define what the identity of that club is. And I think that, like you say with Duncan Ferguson, particularly on the touchline in them moments, I think that encapsulated to me, even as a Liverpool fan, as someone who over the years has come to really respect Everton Football Club just for a number of reasons, off the pitch, on the pitch, but I think it encapsulated what that club is, to be honest. And I think that it was a great moment, like you say, and I think if we're ever going to try and define a cult hero, I think there's possibly no one who sticks out to me more than Duncan Ferguson, the clubs that we're going to look at over the next coming weeks and months. But I think that, in a way, like you say, he made the most of what ability he had, but he comes to encapsulate and define Everton Football Club in a way. And I think that's it's not an easy thing to do, is it, for a player, like you say, at times with limited means, and he was always there for the big goal, rising to the occasion and that sort of thing. So I think that's a fantastic pick, to be honest. And I think that for me as an outsider looking in, it'd be who I'd possibly plumb for as well.
Well, it's funny you mentioned the big goals, Tom, because I know David Prentice has a slightly different, from episode 1, has a slightly different definition of cult hero to me, and he picked Dennis Stracqualursi, a player who personally, maybe it makes me a miserable bastard, but I had no time for. He was a striker who didn't score goals, and yes, Duncan Ferguson doesn't have the most prolific goal record, but 70 goals in 270 odd games is certainly better than the 3 goals in 25 that Dennis Stracqualursi managed. And also, Duncan was a brilliant team player. I cannot picture Dennis Stracqualursi rising to meet the perfect cross to win Everton a crucial game against Manchester United. I know his famous Everton goal was against Chelsea, Stracqualursi, so maybe, but for me, I don't think being a cult hero is as much of a degradation on someone's talent as some might interpret. And I think you actually have to have a bit of talent to be a cult hero. Otherwise, you're just a bit of a joke. I think otherwise you are just a bit of a joke, and you're almost willing them on. You can be a cult hero in a Sunday League team and just be the bloke who shows up hungover every week and tries his best and doesn't win the ball once, but that doesn't work at the elite level. And the other players I'd considered were another one that you'd mentioned, Tim Cahill. Tim Cahill, there are a few Everton players I love more than him because it was exactly when I was growing up, and at that age where you're just obsessed with your football club. And he was a good player, again, like Duncan. Not a brilliant technician, but a good footballer, but also who made the most of what he had. And
I think he's criminally underrated footballer, Tim Cahill.
I do as well, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. The goals he got for Australia in World Cups showed it wasn't just an Everton thing as well. He made the most of his ability wherever he went, and he impacted games like not many players are able to. Tim Cahill might be one of the great impact players, and the ability he had in the air, but he's nowhere near 6 foot tall, was just astonishing. And then
astounding, yeah.
Other players I have, Thomas Gravison, the real cult hero from the time I grew up, and a good midfielder. People aren't. I think people loved him at the time. I think there's been a bit of retrospective view of Thomas Gravison that he wasn't that good, but Real Madrid bought him. There's that joke that Real Madrid tried to sign Lee Carsley.
That was the playground joke at the time, wasn't it? We all know from that time, Dan.
They got the wrong bald midfielder. But Thomas Gravison was good. He was another fighter, and I think to be a cult hero at Goodison, you have to be a fighter. You can't go missing. I'm not the sort of football fan who believes that chasing lost causes and running yourself into the ground is the be all and end all. I'd rather a bit of skill than just mindless energy, because if you paid me 40 grand a week, I would run my arse off for Everton Football Club. I would just keep going forever until I could stop. Until I couldn't do it. If you wanted someone to 2-foot a Liverpool player in the derby, there's no point signing some awful midfielder. I'll do it. I would do it. But Thomas Gravison at least was a good midfielder, and also in that group I've got Tony Hibbert, who I love too. Generally, I think a good defender, really good tackler, brilliant slide tackler. Probably from that last wave of fullbacks who weren't bombing forward. Tony had a great cross on him, a great deep looping cross, but he wasn't Andy Robertson, Trent Alexander-Arnold, Seamus Coleman, Leighton Baines. He wasn't a bombing forward. He was a steady fullback. He was very, very good. Maybe became a bit of a joke because he loved fishing and he never scored for Everton. Never scored an official goal for Everton. He was a good fullback, and he was a good player in a good, committed, overachieving team. And then the other name I put down, it didn't spring to mind initially as a cult hero, but just a player that is universally loved by Everton fans, was Yakubu. And he feels a bit of a cult Premier League figure, in that great striker. He's the 20. I loved him. I absolutely loved him. I've written on Main Stand Musings where I put a lot of my Everton ramblings on how much I love Yakubu.
It's a great piece.
But he is a Premiership cult hero, Premier League, probably in the Premier. It was probably still called the Premiership then, wasn't he? But Premiership cult hero. Yeah. Of just brilliant poacher, ruined by injury. His Everton career ruined by injuries, but just there's something about him. He was loved. Every club who had him loved him. He was almost that Moyes team was made up of cult figures. Really, looking back on it.
Yeah, it's interesting that. Yeah.
And Yakubu was probably one of the most talented in terms of just. He was a poacher. He could read the game. He knew exactly where to be. And was great. Was so good at it. He was the first great Everton number 9. Well, for one season he was. Great Everton number 9 that I saw, really. Yeah. And just a brilliant striker. But there are so many from that era that I think if you allow a cult hero to be a good player as well, there's a lot that fall into that category.
Yeah. I certainly like how you've sort of defined it as well, because I think I'm on the same wavelength as you, that you're basically at a top club, you've got to have a bit of talent, like you've got to have something about you, and I think that, like you say with them players that you've listed, I think they all had something about them, didn't they? And they endeared themselves to the fans because of that ability. I think that's the first thing I'd say, and I think that, I'd agree with your choices there, and I like the one at the end with Yakubu as well, who I know that you're a big fan of as well. So Jack, I think that he's gone with Big Dunk there, and I think it's the first time we've had Big Dunk as a cult hero figure, isn't it?
Yeah, which is probably a bit surprising, I guess. Or maybe I don't know, maybe I just assumed that because obviously we loved Big Dunk up in Newcastle as well, so perhaps a bit of my sort of unconscious bias was expecting his name to copper up, but he was magnificent. A brilliant player, and I think, like Dan's obviously touched on, it's not it's certainly Everton's a funny one really, because it's like you've got a lot of cult heroes, a lot of players who had really like shown real love by the fans, but it didn't, it certainly, like you said earlier, Dan, wasn't about their diminished status as players. It's often a lot of some really high quality players, and I've just realised as well, as on a slight sidetrack, that myself and Dan are currently working on a preview ahead of a forthcoming Newcastle Everton fixture, as I did with Tom a few weeks back, and I've asked a question about who Dan considers to be the greatest player to play for Newcastle and Everton, and I've just realised that I don't think Duncan Ferguson was actually on my suggested mini list of names, which is an absolute crime.
Who did he go for? Who did he go for on the original interview?
I haven't seen his answers yet, Tom. But
Okay.
Like I suggested a few for you. It wasn't like a strict list. I did the same with it. I was trying to think, like, who's brilliant, who's played for Everton and Newcastle, and I don't know what
Gaza, but you got
I did suggest Gaza.
Both ends of the career, really.
I just must have forgot about Duncan. I want to take this opportunity to publicly apologise to Dan and Duncan Ferguson, and also state that he's definitely right up there. And the fact that I was almost considering Alessandro Pistone before.
I was going to say Pistone.
Disgraceful.
Yeah. If it makes you feel better, Jack, Dan Gosling came to mind.
Oh yeah, I didn't mind Dan Gosling actually. Yeah,
interesting one. Yeah.
He might come up on my cult one for Newcastle. Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking Gaza, but that's a bit of a left field shout because you didn't really see the best of him on both sides.
He was a bit far gone when he showed up at
absolutely.
Goodison, really.
Yeah.
He was great for us, but he was very young. So anyway, we'll move on to Dan's greatest 11.
Yeah, far away, Dan.
Fine. Well, so I picked mine, and I listened to your first episode of the series with Dave Prentice. I found out, I think I'm going to take it as a compliment on my knowledge of Everton. But Dave and I ended up picking a very similar team. And I do promise that I picked this before, and I've done it on a previous podcast actually. That I went back and listened to the team I picked, made some tweaks because I wasn't exactly right first time. But what I'm going to do is because I think Dave, as I think he mentioned, he's watched about a third of Everton's games ever.
It's not bad, yeah, not a bad effort.
I can't compete with that. He's seen all those players in the flesh. I will very briefly run you through what I think would make the greatest Everton 11 of all time, and then I'll focus on the players I've seen in the flesh in my lifetime, really, because I think that's where we'll get some slightly different picks from what your previous guests have said. So to quickly run through, obviously you have Neville Southall in goal. The only other options the only other option really is Ted Sagar, but that's ages before. And how do you not include the club's most decorated player ever in the 11, and also widely considered the best goalkeeper in the game at points in the 80s? So definitely. Neville straight in. Mm-hmm. Gary Stevens as your right back gets ahead of Seamus Coleman purely because he was in he was a good player, but he's also in a successful team. Seamus Coleman was brilliant for Everton at times, but he's probably going to end up being Everton captain during one of the least successful periods in Everton's history. So you struggle to put him in your best team ever. Mm. Centre half, you have Brian LeBone for nothing of if nothing else, the quote, "One Evertonian is worth 20 Liverpudlians," which I just think is perfect quote. That gets you in the side alone. But he also won 2 league titles and an FA Cup and was a great Everton captain. Alongside him, you have Kevin Ratcliffe, 359 league games for Everton. Famous Anfield derby goal, I think. Great Everton captain, 2 league titles. Captain Everton to the European Cup Winners' Cup, Captain Everton to an FA Cup as well. Straight in the team. Leighton Baines is your left back. Maybe it's between him and Lukaku for the best player I've seen at Everton in my lifetime. Then I'm slightly deviating from Dave in midfield. I'm dropping Howard Kendall because I'm not playing him as a player manager. He's managing the team. Yeah. He's managing the team so I can bring Peter Reid into midfield because my dad would never speak to me again if I didn't pick Peter Reid in my... my dad thinks Peter Reid's the best footballer he's ever seen, so Peter Reid's going in alongside Alan Ball and Colin Harvey. Colin Harvey was claimed by manager Harry Catterick to be the best of the Holy Trinity of the three midfielders. I think he was nicknamed the White Pele, which is certainly a dated nickname, but Harvey and Ball, brilliant midfielders. Kendall's not in because he's managing. On the right, I got tricky Trevor Steven, great winger, 14 league goals in one of Everton's title-winning seasons in the 80s. Great crosser of the ball, prolific goal scorer from the wings, great player. Kevin Sheedy on the left, obviously. Maybe the best left-footer to have played for Everton. Beautiful striker for a dead ball, great winger. Well, I think that leaves me, because I'm playing 4-5-1 here, so I'm going to have to let my mum down and not play Bob Latchford, who's her favourite Everton player ever, because Dixie Dean plays up front. And we've actually, if Dixie gets injured, we've got quite the backup of Bob Latchford, Graham Sharp, Dave Hickson, Gary Lineker, Romelu Lukaku. Whoever you want. Whoever you want.
I was just going to say, just to nip in there, Dan, because it's interesting you brought his name up. I can't believe how little mention we've had of Gary Lineker so far on the Everton episodes.
I was going to say that.
I'm not expecting him. Tom, I wasn't expecting him to be obviously up consideration for the Go or even cult hero. But and I know he's only there one season. I think.
One season, I think.
But
30 goals.
Even so, I just think for that, how good he was that season.
40.
He was probably one of the best strikers in the world at that time.
Now that was the year of the FA Cup final. I think I'm right in saying 1985-86.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people in Liverpool, if you were younger, it was the basis of what team you ended up supporting, because cup final day at that time was sort of, it was bigger than the league, really, wasn't it? It was even bigger than the European Cup at that time. And I think a lot of people at various points in that game sort of changed allegiances, I've heard over the years, and that sort of thing. So it's quite a figurative moment in Merseyside sport, really, that game as well.
Definitely, and I think what holds Lineker back is also, it's the one season, he got 38 goals, so not quite 40. But also, apparently, so Everton finished second in the league in that season. He got 38 goals, brilliant player in a brilliant team, and I think he still calls it the best team he played in. But it's a season where you lose the league slightly to Liverpool, and apparently Lineker was vaguely at fault because he missed a chance away at Oxford United that nobody's ever forgiven him for. So we finished runners-up to Liverpool in the league and runners-up in the Cup. So while that's a good season by anyone's metric, I think that season stings a bit for Everton fans, and the fact you only get one season out of him. But I think it's forgotten he played for Everton. I mean,
he always says it was the best team he ever played for, didn't he? So,
exactly. Yeah.
But I thought it was interesting that you brought him up. But sorry,
I think he has to be mentioned in that pantheon of great number nines because while it's a short career, 38 goals in 52 Everton appearances will mean he has a strike rate up with the very best. In terms of Everton career.
No, absolutely. I think that, like you say, he's a little bit overlooked, but it is perhaps because of the context of that season. But I think you've made a fantastic team again there, and I think, like you say, it is similar in a way to what Dave came up with. But I think that what I do like when we go through with Everton in particular is that mix of different eras. That I think, there's not many clubs, is there, Jack, that can offer that sort of mixture, really.
No, and it's interesting. Like we've said on each one, there's been a player from each different era that's made up the team. It's a real spread across the decades, which is good for a greatest team. But I know, Dan, but let's go for your the team that you've seen as well, just to give us some sort of debate going into our review episode on the next show.
Well, there's only one player who's in both teams, which is Leighton Baines, because he is so good. And I think, Ray Wilson is your only other option there, really. But Leighton Baines was so good and so unfortunate not to have played more for England. I think Leighton Baines would genuinely be considered one of the greats of his era if we'd ever let him go to someone like Man City or Man United or Chelsea, because he would have just... He was so good, he would have flourished at any of those clubs. But I love Leighton. The way he could strike a football... I think one of the last games I went to before lockdown was a League Cup game against Leicester where he scored the equaliser. It was his last goal for Everton, and it just it's it's 120
poetic,
minutes.
That wasn't it as well?
Yeah. It wasn't. Yeah. It was 90 minutes. So it's to take it to penalty because they scrapped extra time. And the way that man could strike a football, the 2 free kicks against West Ham he got in one game. Actually, the best goal I think he ever scored for Everton was at St James's Park.
It was
free kick against
it was a screamer.
Newcastle.
Absolute horrible moment for me, but hell of a goal.
So I love Leighton so much, and the fact he's a Scouser only helps it more. But starting from goalkeeper, the best Everton goalkeeper I've seen in my life is Nigel Martin, who again is someone who didn't play as
very underrated
international football as he should have done. He was playing in an era where he was competing with David James and Paul Robinson and Ian Walker for sort of the England #1 shirt, wasn't he?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Looking back, he was probably the best keeper of the four. You know, he was the year we got fourth under Moyes. Nigel Martin was so good, and I think Moyes has said Nigel Martin was his best signing as Everton manager because we got him from Leeds. He'd lost his Leeds shirt to Paul Robinson, I think. So, yeah, Nigel Martin. Tim Howard would be the only other choice, but Nigel was better than Tim.
I mean, that's a good choice.
Seamus Coleman at right back. Took him a bit of time to find his feet at Everton. You know, we tried him as a winger for a bit, but he's still there now. He's played over 300 games for the club. Cost £60,000. You know, one of the greatest bargains in football history. I'm just really, you know, Everton were part of that evolution in full-back play. We really were, because that partnership of Coleman and Baines across those two flanks, they were our two main attacking outlets in the later Moyes years and the Martinez era, and they were both brilliant footballers. So Seamus, great, still, you know, great defensively. Not quite the player that he was before his leg break. I think he is quite old now, but brilliant footballer. Centre half's difficult because we've actually had some good ones. The one certain choice from my lifetime is Phil Jagielka. You know, 100% in there. Brilliant centre back. Brilliant, you know, scorer of my favourite Everton goal that I've ever seen, which is a volley at Anfield in added time. Shame it was to only save a draw, but it's the sweetest strike of a football I've ever seen. And he's a brilliant defender. A lot of his defending seemed to be reactive. You know, he's a good last-ditch lunging slide tackle. Might not have been the most disciplined in position. Did have an error in him, but backs to the wall defending. Phil Jagielka did brilliantly. His partnership with Sylvain Distin, who doesn't quite get in this team. Although Sylvain gets very close. The other centre-half I've had some real debate over. But Jagielka and Distin, at their best, were a great partnership. Sylvain, I loved, doesn't quite get in. Ludicrous pace on him. Read the game pretty well. Great in the air. Good centre-half. But Joleon Lescott did all of those things, I think, a little bit better.
He was a great player,
And he was one of the first sort of signs that City were trying to become a dominant force in English football when they bought him from Everton. And his transfer saga left his exit from Everton left a real sour taste. He handled it awfully. He played, I think, in a 6-1 defeat to Arsenal for Everton a couple of days before he joined City. And it ended on a terrible, terrible note. But putting that behind us, Joleon gets in at the other centre half. It was really good. The only other option I thought was John Stones. He's a real sort of, you know, he was far better at Everton than I think he's been at Man City. Although he's finding his feet again at Man City. He was brilliant at Everton, especially alongside Jagielka, and was really modern, really progressive, really, really good on the ball. I always thought there was a central defensive midfielder in John Stones screaming to try and get out, because he has his lapses in defence that I think he might be better in midfield, and I wonder if anyone will ever try that. But he was a good player. He was a good player, John Stones, and the fee we got for him looks astronomical, but made sense at the time. He's a young, and I still think he's still got the ability to really become. I
still think he'll come good as well. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Obviously, Leighton Baines at left back, and then I'm playing 5 in midfield.
Nice.
I'm having two sitting midfielders. Idrissa Gueye is the first one, who was so good. But the one really great signing of the Ronald Koeman era. Well, Michael Keane might be becoming one, but Idrissa Gueye, £7 million from a relegated Aston Villa. Brilliant midfielder. Just
he's great.
The link between defence and midfield, he did that perfectly. He occasionally came up a bit short in the opposition half, but in terms of interceptions, harrying players, tackling, winning the ball back, recycling it, he was such an important cog in that machine. And the person playing next to him did a similar job, but not quite as quickly, is Gareth Barry, who I adore.
I thought he'd make an appearance.
He had to make an appearance.
There was never any chance he wasn't getting in this team.
One of my favourite players ever, Gareth Barry, and I don't know how boring that makes me sound, but nobody reads a game of football, I think, from midfield like Gareth Barry. Everton's midfield went to pot whenever he was suspended or was carrying a knock and couldn't start, because just the way he stopped attacks dead, and then played straight out from the back to a player with more skill and flair was such an important thing. And his partnership, he played a bit with Idris Gueye in his final season, but his partnership with James McCarthy was extraordinary in that first Martin this season. But Barry was brilliant. Everyone thought he was past it when we bought him from City, or we got him on loan. But he was exactly what we needed. That intelligent, experienced reader of the game who was a good tackler, was also great at those cynical yellow cards when you're 1 or 2-0 up and you need to kill some time.
The master.
I love them, mate. That's one of my favourite aspects.
That's
of
your
the game.
trademark move, Tom.
I love that. I love it. I'm going to watch highlight reels. I'm going to compile a highlight reel together at some point. I love it.
He played a lot for England, Barry, but I also think he could have been the cure to the Lampard-Gerrard problem.
He
possibly.
He kind of they kind of flirted with it under McLaren. Weirdly enough, McLaren seemed to have brought him in, and it seemed like that was going to work. But I think Gareth Barry is the one player, Dan, that as much as you love it, and I completely understand why you love it. He was brilliant for Everton that second spell, and I'll hold my hands up and say I thought he was potentially finished by the time he came to you. Was completely wrong. But people always talk about Rooney, Gerrard, Lampard, them not hitting their heights for their country as getting up to the standard they played for their clubs. I think Gareth Barry's the biggest example of that. I think whenever he played for England, I always watched him for Villa and then at City and then at Everton, and I always thought he's brilliant. But just for England, and maybe I'm just focusing too much on that World Cup in South Africa, but I never felt like he hit the heights for England for how good he was for his club.
He's a player with over 50 international caps. Yeah. And the only thing you can remember from his international career is being completely outplayed by that German midfielder in 2010. And that is a problem, and that is right. But as an Everton player, he was extraordinary and unlucky, I think, not to get an international, because he didn't play once for England when he was at Everton.
No, he never got the recall.
He was quite old by then. But I think he probably deserved a recall, or even just for, he could have filled the hole for a couple of qualifiers or whatever. But wonderful player for Everton, and that reading of the game and the clever tactical cool head, just so good. Gueye and Barry being in the centre means I've had to shift Mikel Arteta out to the right, and he played a bit on the wing for Everton in earlier sort of seasons.
It's very mid 2000s, that Dan. Very mid.
It is.
Shifting your centre mid.
Gerrard as well.
Danny Murphy on the right wing.
Dan's team is such a Rafa Benitez setup. I absolutely love it.
This is probably about the time that Moyes would play Osman on the left wing and Arteta on the right. But Mikel Arteta gets in as Mikel Arteta is in ahead of James Rodriguez, which sounds ridiculous. But James Rodriguez has played about 15 times for Everton, so he can't get in. He is clearly going to be in that team by the time he's left Everton because he's an extraordinary player. But this is almost the James role is what I'm playing Mikel Arteta in. This is sort of coming off the right. Mikel was such a skillful player with so much flair. We didn't replace that creativity that we lost when we sold him to Arsenal. Pardon me. For years, he was so good. The way he struck a penalty, a free kick, but the way he created chances, just crossing into the box. He's an extraordinary player. The fact he never played international football tells you all you need to know about the quality of that Spanish midfield that won all those international trophies. Mikel Arteta was an extraordinary player of so much skill and class, so elegant, so good looking as well, which helps for a midfielder who's good on the ball. I think it just it really elevates them. And Mikel was great. Mikel and Tim Cahill are the sort of two people I think of as the real stars of the Moyes teams. And I've got Cahill playing as my attacking midfielder in this team.
Great choice.
I think he scored 56 goals for Everton from midfield over about 8 or 9 seasons, and there were a couple of seasons where he had his problems with injury, but such a good footballer, so good in the air, so many huge goals, gave his all for the shirt. And I know earlier I said that passion wasn't all that mattered, but luckily Tim Cahill had the passion and the running, but also knew where the back of the goal was, knew how to find the man, knew how to score a goal.
Great player, in my opinion. Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Just exemplified by his volley against Holland at the 2014 World Cup, which is one of the best bits of individual skill I've ever seen. But Scored an overhead kick for Everton against Chelsea in about 2007, 2008, which is brilliant timing. And he was such a nuisance to defenders. One of his best Everton performances came in we beat Liverpool 3-0 in a derby in 2006 when Pepe Reina made a couple of terrible blunders. But
it was terrible.
Cahill started it. I think Cahill scored the first goal and was just brilliant all day and it was probably Carragher and Hoopier back then, wasn't it? He gave them a torrid afternoon. He was so good. And for a long time, he was our main goal threat playing from midfield. And, Moyes would play him up front occasionally, but he was so good. And Fellaini, weirdly, because they couldn't be more different in terms of size and build, but Fellaini did a similar role for Everton, where he'd be that threat from attacking midfield. And but Cahill gets in. I just love that man so much. He is just a childhood hero and a great player to boot. And on the left wing is another player with a bit of flair, which is Stephen Pienaar, who career petered out under Roberto Martinez, but in his first spell and then his first season back in his second spell, he was extraordinary. His kinesis with Leighton Baines on the left-hand side, the connection they had was a joy to behold. And I think it was in his second spell. There's a lovely goal. I'm afraid Joe can bring up another goal against Newcastle.
I can remember this game as well. I can remember this goal.
All his examples are against Liverpool and Newcastle.
That's true. That's true. It's almost like he's planned this. I can remember this game though, Dan. I think we actually mounted a second half comeback under Pardew.
Yeah, I think Demba Ba scored a late equaliser.
That was it. But yeah, I remember the first half. You're right, Baines and Pienaar. It was a brilliant goal, and they were a classic combination because Pienaar loved to come inside. Was like your perfect inside left wide player who just brilliant at cutting inside, and Baines obviously just fantastic overlapping fullback, isn't he?
This goal just illustrated how good they were. I think Baines is bombing forward from left back, and Pienaar drags a defender in. So Baines plays it into feet to Pienaar, who plays a clever flick past the defender. Baines takes one touch and is suddenly free on the left-hand side of the box and just drills a great effort into the bottom corner. And it's just beautifully cute and delicate from Pienaar. But he scored some great goals for Everton, Stephen Pienaar. There was a lovely goal at the Emirates where he's
the one at Arsenal.
He could strike a great long-range shot. There's a great one at Villa, I seem to remember. Wonderful footballer, just so skillful, and that sort of tricky winger who could, there were times where I remember watching Everton where Phil Neville was attempting step overs. So to see someone like Stephen Pienaar do a step over, who could actually do a step over and beat a man, was just glorious to watch, and I love him. He's another one that maybe could be considered for cult hero. He was sort of his celebration, his love. Where he would pull his shirt up and he'd have a T-shirt underneath which read "God is great," and he was just this sort of He as a figure, he was loved. So Stephen Pienaar gets in, and then for me at centre forward, there were a few options.
I could have gone. I thought this was going to be your big decision really up front.
I could have gone Duncan. Because I've technically seen him, I didn't see him at his peak, but I thought I could have sort of wormed that in. Could go Wayne Rooney purely for, Wayne Rooney's second spell at Everton's a really contentious point, but he finished that season as our top scorer and scored a vital hat-trick against West Ham, and scored I think 11 or 12 goals that season. And also the Wayne Rooney that emerged as a 16-year-old is as naturally gifted a player as this country's ever produced. Maybe it's just watching him, and that sort of coincided with the time I started watching Everton. So Wayne Rooney was just a hero, but Romelu Lukaku leads the line in this team. He is our top Premier League goal scorer. His goal record is frightening. We weren't that good in many of Lukaku's seasons for us. We got fifth in his first season, but then finished bottom half in a couple of them as well. And the fact, 87 goals in 166 games for an average Everton side is an extraordinary record. And because
young as well at the time, people forget very young at the time as well. Yeah, it's a phenomenal record.
He's a brilliant striker with just an eye for goal. People criticised him for not running. People criticised him for his first touch. His first touch wasn't great, but he found enough touches that would send the ball into the back of the net for me to not care about his first touch. There's again made one of my favourite visits to Goodison, where I came back from university and we were playing an FA Cup quarter final against Chelsea, So I picked an example here, which isn't one of your boys' two clubs, but FA Cup quarter-final, and Romelu scores two brilliant goals. The first one is replayed a lot, where it's a bit of a solo goal, and he takes it past. He somehow beats Gary Cahill about 4 times, and Gary Cahill gets up off the floor to try and tackle again, and Romelu just cuts past him again.
It reminds me of that goal. Always reminds me, Dan, of the Ricky Villa FA Cup final goal for Tottenham. Like, I don't know why, it just got like similar, like running from that side of the box. But sorry, go on, continue.
And he plants it into the bottom corner, and then the second one he's played a ball through, probably from Ross Barkley, plants it in the net. And when he put the second one in, with about 20 minutes to go in an FA Cup quarter-final, sending Everton to Wembley for a semi-final, the place exploded to almost Duncan Ferguson levels. So that will always be my abiding memory of Romelu. He did miss a penalty in the semi-final against Manchester United, so it wasn't all sweet. But he was a great player, and he scored. He scored in big games. He had a great record in his one season in the Europa League for us. He scored 25 in his last year under Ronald Koeman.
Yeah.
How anyone scores 25 goals for a Ronald Koeman side is beyond me. Ronald Koeman's doing his best this season to turn Lionel Messi into a central midfielder. So, the fact that Romelu can score 25 goals under it is something else, really. So, I loved Rom. I adored him because he was an elite player who we knew we weren't going to have him forever. I always knew he'd lead to someone. I always thought it would be back to Chelsea, but he did go to United. But he gave us 4 seasons of his career, and you look at how well he's done at Inter. United was a bit of a blip, but Romelu Lukaku's goal record, and just the fact that he is a great goal scorer and a great striker. I do think a great striker. He will go down as one of the great strikers of his era, and he gave 4 seasons to an Everton team battling for Europa League football, and he was above where we were at the minute. And my God, what I would give to have Romelu Lukaku spearheading a team that had James Rodriguez, Alan, and Lucas Digne and Richarlison creating chances for it, because I think that could be something special. Yeah. But that's my 11 of players I've seen in my life, which I don't think would beat the greatest Everton team ever. But I think.
I think they give them a game.
I think I know the midfield for the all-time, it's been pretty straightforward. In our other episodes, you obviously can't deviate too far from the Holy Trinity. But I tell you what, there's something I like about an Idrissa Gueye, Gareth Barry double pivot in midfield. There's something magnificently will just shut out the opposition in that midfield. So
it is very Benitez, like you made the point before.
I think it would give most current Premier League teams a game. I think this team would get Champions League. I'm saying it. I think this team would get Champions League. I'm happy to put that out there.
Fantastic stuff. So we've got 2 sets of great sides there, and obviously one for us in the review episode to look through, Jack, as well. But definitely food for thought for us too. And Dan went for Dixie Dean, of course, as the Everton greatest ever player, and of course Duncan Ferguson as their greatest cult hero. I've thoroughly enjoyed having you back on the show, Dan. I'm sure it's not going to be the final time. I'm sure we find a way of worming you back onto the show. But it's been a thoroughly enjoyable hour for me, and I'm sure for you as well, Jack.
Yeah, no, that was brilliant. I mean, you don't need me to tell you that Dan obviously knows his history as well, as even though he's a more modern fan. So really enjoyed that, boys. Thanks for coming on, Dan. And I'm looking forward to our review episode, Tom, where we'll have to just go into a bit more analysis and perhaps go for our own selections as well.
Well, I mean, Dan's definitely given us sort of something to start from as well with a more contemporary team as well. And I think that's interesting for us. And like we say, a review episode will be coming up in the next few weeks as well. But that's episode 3 of the Everton mini-series as part of the G.O.A.T club series that we've been putting together. Thanks a lot to Dan Haygarth for coming on. If you'd like to give us a bit of feedback, obviously check us out on Twitter at @GOAT_podcast_. I think we're on Instagram as well, but you'll have to remind me, Jack, of how to access that one.
We'll get the handle set up for next week.
We'll get that one set up. Until next time, I think Dan's got something to say, by the way, before we go.
I'm going to shamelessly use the airtime to plug Main Stand Musings, which I know is a good friend of the Go podcast.
Feel free.
I was plugging pieces on from Main Stand Musings back in the summer, back during lockdown one, Dan, so it's been done before, but we'll allow it.
I'd make use of this partnership. You can find, if you enjoy listening to me chat about Everton, not many people do, but if you want to see that in written form, you can find it at mainstandmusings.wordpress.com. And you can also find us on Twitter at MainSmusings for not just Everton, but general sports comment pieces from, I think, a great selection of journalists, including you two fine gents. But thank you very much for having me on this episode. I very much enjoyed it.
No worries, Dan. We really enjoyed it. And obviously go and follow Main Stand Musings as well over on Twitter. That's just about it from me and Jack anyway. And we'll see you on the review episode in a couple of weeks' time as well. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Cheers, guys. See you next week.